Hello and welcome back. Again, this course focuses on the analyze and adapt step of the conservation standards and will provide you with vital skills for using your monitoring data and new information to adapt as needed and improve your conservation efforts. In Module 4, you will learn how to prepare and present your monitoring results to support team analysis. At this point, you are a small team preparing for a reflect and adapt session. You need to bring together all the elements that will support efficient and well-grounded decision-making. This includes compiling the data, graphs, and charts for your team's analysis, reflecting on what those data, graphs, and charts are telling you, and summarizing your data in a variety of ways, including a written narrative. This third bullet point will set you up for the next module, where your team will do the actual decision-making and adaptation. By the end of this module, you will be able to generate meaningful charts and figures that show project progress. You can share these with your team to support decision-making about whether and how to adapt. You should also be able to interpret and effectively communicate to your different audiences the progress and outcomes associated with implementing your project. As a reminder, here is the 5-step conservation standards cycle. This course is focused on Step 4, Analyze and Adapt. And this module focuses on the Analyze Results substep. By the end of Module 3, you had learned how to enter progress updates for all of the elements of your results chain. Here again is our stoplight diagram for all results and activities from that module. This is a useful diagram and should be part of your report and preparation for your broader team to go through a reflect and adapt process. But it's not the only piece of information that you want to provide. The broader team needs a lot of information to make informed decisions, so you need to paint a full picture of what is happening with your project. In this module, we will share with you some options for generating the figures, charts, and tables your team will need for its reflect and adapt process. As your team prepares to go through a reflect and adapt process, it will need several key elements to make informed decisions. In particular, you will need access to any new information you gathered and any changes in context since you first designed your project, a summary of how you are doing on implementing your project, in other words, progress on actions. Here you will look at whether you have done what you said you would do, and if not, why not? You will consider strategies, activities, and monitoring activities. You will also look at the progress on outcomes associated with your project. These include looking at whether you are achieving the desired results laid out in your results chain, whether you are achieving your goals and objectives, and why or why not, and where are you running into issues. In order to tell your project story, you need to make sure you have the right graphics and narrative for each of these elements. As you go through the process of developing your graphics and narrative, it will also be important to keep the bigger picture in mind and think about how you are seeing or what you are seeing at the different levels may influence your overall project accomplishments. Let's start with talking about new information that has surfaced since you first planned your project or since the last time you went through a reflect and adapt process. In Module 2, you already incorporated new information into relevant areas of your overall project plan. You may recall that the Eastern Bay team had uncertainties about whether rats were the sole cause of seabird nest predation, and they found evidence to support this assumption from Wagner et al. They recorded this new information and modified the arrow in their situation model to illustrate their confidence in the assumption that introduced rats are a high threat to seabird nests. They also used an asterisk to remind their team that this information or there is information tied to this arrow. You will want to bring this new information and your change log into your team's decision-making process, which we will talk about more in Module 5. As we describe all the elements that can inform the reflect and adapt process, it's important to keep in mind that the process is not linear, even though we are presenting it in a fairly linear fashion. For example, new information related to your situation, your strategies and associated results chain, or your overall project is likely coming in at various points as you implement your project. As that new information comes in, You may respond to it right away, or you may make a note of it for your reflect and adapt process. You will have to determine what is right for your context and based upon what you are learning as you go along. Next, we should focus on compiling elements related to progress on actions. We want to be able to assess whether we did what we said we would and why or why not. Actions include the activities you need to do to implement your strategy, as well as the monitoring activities you should be doing to track progress. Actions also include the broader strategies that encompass your implementation and monitoring activities. You'll want to understand how you are doing on all these actions. You'll also want to think about any obstacles that are preventing you from implementing your activities. For example, lack of capacity or resources, as well as factors that may be supporting implementation. For example, maybe there's a new government official who is supportive of your effort and wants to contribute funds or in-kind support. Our stoplight diagram provides a useful way to see the status of all our actions at a quick glance and in relation to our overall results chain. It's a great way to quickly identify where there are potential problems, like here, and they are related to one another. For example, we can see this team is having some issues with its monitoring activities, though the implementation itself seems to be on track. The main downside to a stoplight diagram is that you cannot see all the explanation behind the ratings. Because of this, it's a good idea to pair this diagram with a table, chart, and/or narrative that does provide more details and justification for the ratings. You may also want to include some data over years so that you can see trends and changes over time. If working in Marathi Share, you can generate an action chart by navigating to the Progress and then Action Chart tab up here. You have the option to see all your strategies or zoom in on a specific strategy. Here we are showing the action chart for a single strategy, this campaign to stop shark fin soup. You can also then export the chart here to create an image that you can insert into your narrative report. The action chart is a tabular way to see your action's status. It conveys most of the same information as a stoplight diagram, but it might work better for those who do not like box and arrow diagrams or who might get distracted by other information in a stoplight diagram. The bar on the right of this figure shows how many activities under the higher level strategy are in different rating categories. The action status column provides data information or date information that you cannot see in the stoplight diagram, and that might be useful for the team to know. Here's an action chart for the whole project. So it's all results chains, not just the shark fin results chain. This can be a useful view to quickly identify strategies in need of attention, like here. Another useful view for pulling together your narrative is the Progress Action Tracking view. Here you can expand and collapse rows as needed. Another useful view for pulling together your narrative is the Progress Action Tracking view. Here you can expand and collapse rows as needed and get more information on the right-hand side that provides the justification for your ratings. This is the main advantage of this view, although it would not make a useful narrative graphic because it will only show you justification information for a single factor at a time. So if you've done a good job entering your progress on actions, you should have information in your progress updates that will help you develop your narrative. For example, here you can see that the monitoring activity, Shark M4, to survey shark populations is experiencing some major issues in getting baseline data. You can see that there have been difficulties because you cannot find the right partner with sufficient expertise. You can reflect this information in your overall narrative that describes the progress on actions and why you have had trouble achieving some actions. For those who want to explore even further, there are other ways to get data out of Marathi, especially if you are fairly comfortable with using spreadsheets and filters. Marathi has the option to see different data views. This view you are seeing here is the strategy plus activity progress table. You can also customize the columns and filters. So here we have filtered for our shark fin strategy. We have removed some columns to simplify it and also grouped like factors. In order for these data views to work well, you will have to give some thought to how to filter and which columns to hide or show. This may require a bit of playing around to get it right. You can then export this data to Excel or another spreadsheet program and format it however is useful. Keep in mind that Marathi is constantly changing, so there may be new features available that are not reflected in this presentation. Here's a formatted extract of that same table that you just saw that was created by exporting the data to Excel and formatting it as works best for your team. The main advantage of this table over other graphics shown earlier is that you can see the details that clarify the ratings. This is important information as you develop your narrative and for your team to consider when it's thinking about how or if to adapt. We were just looking at our actions and reflecting on whether we did what we said we would. Now we want to compile elements that convey the degree to which we are seeing the outcomes we expected. Outcomes include our desired results. These are the blue and purple boxes in our results chains, as well as our conservation and human well-being targets. Outcomes also include the degree to which we are meeting the specific, measurable, time-bound goals and objectives we have set. As you draft your Reflect and Adapt report for your team, you will want to help them understand how the project is progressing toward these outcomes. You'll also want to convey any obstacles that are preventing your team from seeing the desired outcomes, as well as factors that may be supporting the achievement of those outcomes. For example, maybe there's been a change in the government that has affected the level of support for conservation in the area. Again, the stoplight diagram is a useful way to see the status of all results at a quick glance and in relation to the overall results chain. You can see the status of results where there are objectives here to get a quick sense of how the team is doing on objectives. You can also see if other results that don't have objectives are being achieved. For example, here we can see that the team indicates that consumers are aware and concerned and that restaurants are not serving shark fin soup. The stoplight diagram is also a great way to identify quickly where there are potential problems and if they are related to one another. For example, we can see that this team is not seeing the results they expected to see in the latter half of the diagram. This may be due to the early nature of the work. It's likely too early to expect to see much change, but there may also be some flaws in the overall logic. For example, is demand for shark fins in the capital city an important contributor to illegal shark fishing in the Eastern Bay? The diagram provides the team with a structured way to have these types of discussions in the context of the whole strategy. As mentioned earlier, the main downside to a stoplight diagram is that you cannot see all the explanation behind the ratings. Because of this, it's a good idea to pair this diagram with a table or chart that does provide more details and justification for the ratings. Unfortunately, Marathi does not have the option to see a summary results chart the way you can do with an action chart. You can use the results tracking view and take a snapshot to get a summary of each results chain. However, your stoplight diagram may be more informative as you can see the results in the context of your results chain. It will be useful to understand your team's preferences. If you have some people who really don't like boxes and arrows, you may want to include a snapshot of the results tracking view. As we mentioned earlier, keep in mind that Marathi is regularly innovating and improving and may offer other results figure options in the future. Indicator charts are a great way to see data tied to your goals and objectives. To generate these in Marathi Share, you need to make sure that you have entered measurement data for your different indicators over time. You do need to be careful that you are entering only numeric data. For example, enter 65 as your value, not 65% of restaurants. In this figure, you can see that the indicator chart shows that the Eastern Bay team exceeded their objective to have more than 50% of the restaurants signed on to the campaign. The great thing about indicator charts, if you have entered your data consistently, is that they can provide you a view of how you are progressing over time on that particular indicator. And if you've set a desired future status, like we see here in blue, you can get a quick visual of how you are doing relative to where you want to be. You won't be able to see the justification behind the indicator data, but the charts will tell an interesting story over time. You can find indicator datas or indicator charts under Progress Results Tracking, and then navigating over here, expanding all of your columns and going to the purple triangle, the indicator itself. And then you can click on Indicator Chart on the right-hand side. From here, you can export the charts as PNG files and insert them into your narrative report. You can also extract indicator charts for your goals. In Marathi Share, goals are separated out from objectives and your overall results chains. You will need to go to Progress Impact Tracking, and from there you can go to the relevant target, sharks for example, and click on the indicator, and on the left-hand side, choose the chart view. You can also export your image just like we saw on the previous slide. Some goals and objectives involve qualitative data. Up until now, we have shown indicator charts with numeric continuous data. Marathi does have the option to create 4-point categorical scales for qualitative data that will allow you to see some general trends. This option is only available for impact tracking of goals. At the recording of this presentation, it was not available for objectives. Sometimes you may have qualitative data that do not fit well into categories, or maybe the categories don't have relative meaning, or perhaps you want to represent qualitative data for an objective. In these cases, you can estimate the percent progress toward achieving an objective or goal. In this case, we can see that the team expects a healthy shark population would provide an ecosystem service of sharks for subsistence needs. Here, the team recorded that few subsistence farmers indicated they were seeing more sharks available for subsistence needs. This slide shows the progress percent concept. The objective, which is not shown here, was qualitative, looking for most subsistence fishers to feel they can more easily catch sharks. Indicator data for this qualitative objective might be hard to display in a graph. However, you can enter percent progress updates under the objective rather than the indicator, so right here for this blue box, and give an estimate of how far along you are toward achieving your objective. In this case, you can see that the latest update showed that some, but not most, subsistence fishers felt that they can easily catch sharks. You can also see over here that Marathi provides a pie chart graphic to indicate where you are on the objective. As we talked about earlier, there are other ways to get data out of Marathi if you want to explore the data views option. This view you are seeing here is the goals plus objective assessment latest view. In this example, we have filtered all goals and objectives for those that have the word shark in them. Again, you could then export this data to Excel or another spreadsheet program and format it however it is most useful. You may want the full details, but you will likely also want a simpler view for soliciting input from your broader stakeholder group. We'll discuss this more in Module 5. At this point, you should have all the tables, charts, and figures you need to be able to pull together a narrative report that your team and others participating in the Reflect and Adapt process can use to develop a shared understanding of where your project is and where and why things are going well or you're experiencing challenges. Putting everything together in a narrative is an important step because it provides a common space where everything is together and easily accessible. It allows you to see both the details and to zoom out and see the big picture and the connections among your activities, monitoring results, objectives, and goals, and where interplays among them may be influencing your ability to achieve your desired outcomes. It gives your team the monitoring results and explanation they need to determine where adaptation is needed. It combines text and figure so that you can appeal to different learning styles. The two also help reinforce one another. And your narrative provides a written summary of a specific point in time. It can be something you come back to at a later point in time. This is particularly useful once your team and relevant partners add in their thoughts about where adaptation is needed. To pull together an effective narrative, there are several good practices you should consider. First, you want to get the right level of detail. So you want to write enough to explain what is happening, but not so much that it takes too long for your team and others to read through it. You do not want to discourage them from reading the full report. Here you can see a concise summary of the Stop Shark Fin Soup project. Related to this point, it's important to include figures and use them to help support your narrative. In most cases, it is not useful to just repeat in text what you can see in the figure. Use your narrative to summarize the figures and tables, and then draw your team's focus to specific points that the figures and tables help make. Try to look at the whole picture. The detailed charts and tables are useful, but also take a step back to look for connections among activities, results, objectives, and goals. Label and number figures, charts, and tables and refer to them in your narrative. Here you can see the narrative referring to Figure 1 and Table 1. Share your draft narrative with at least one other team member before sharing it with the wider team and partners participating in the Reflect and Adapt process. An extra set of eyes and a different viewpoint are always helpful in strengthening a report. Give people sufficient time to review your narrative before coming together for the Reflect and Adapt process. Remember, it's important to refer to those figures in the appropriate spot in the narrative. But you are not trying to restate what's in the figure. Rather, you are drawing attention to specific issues, like in this example, how the team struggled with implementing its monitoring activities. Your narrative is also a place for you to do some initial reflection that gets at the why behind what you are seeing and/or what this could mean for your project going forward. So, to recap what we covered in this presentation, in this module, we talked about compiling data, graphs, and charts to support team analysis, thinking about what your data, graphs, and charts are indicating and what information you need to share with your team, and developing written narratives that will support team decision-making on what and how to adapt. That takes us to the end of Module 4. In our next module, you will use the charts, figures, and narratives you have generated to support your team's analysis of your results and decision-making about whether and how to adapt your conservation work.